All right, boys and girls, Suki MMA and Stand 'em Up are back for our YouTube channel, Cage Menace, with an interesting topic coming out of the weekend. Muhammad Mokaev. What the heck did he do?
He fucked up, bro. He fucked up. He thought that he was slick trying to get like a deal done with the PFL and then show it to the UFC. Like, hey, they offered this much money, so I'm gonna need more from you. And before that was done, the UFC got wind of it, and some problems happened there. And after his fight, where he didn't really show anything, they decided to not re-sign him, which makes sense. It all makes sense. Before that, everybody was saying, yeah, it's just because he's boring, he doesn't get in the money, but I knew there was something else going on. It would make sense.
100%.
So yeah, I'd like to hear more from you, bro.
I think it makes a lot of sense now. I think that there's something to be said for the comment that Dana made with regards to the PFL, because clearly he was shopping around. And to be honest with you, from an employer standpoint, you can't blame the UFC, right? If this was you with your regular job and you were trying, you were ready for a promotion, or you felt like you were stuck in a spot, and and you had the opportunity to renegotiate, um, naturally you would see what the current company has to offer and let them know you'll think about it. Do your shopping around. Let them know, even if you want to compete, let them know that this is what this group is saying. Mind you, the UFC in this case might have just been like, all right, well, then take it and go. So I just think that from a business perspective, from an employee perspective, he made a bad decision. And I think he's going to pay for it for the rest of his life. Because in multiple cases with Dana, specifically Dana, when fighters go out of their way to do things that he might not respect, like, enjoy, whatever the case may be, that's basically a ban for life. You can go on an absolute run on the regional scene or in other promotions, and the fact is you're done with the UFC.
Yeah, most probably. I mean, we've seen some people say like Dana say like, yeah, he'll never fight in the UFC, or women will never fight in the UFC, and then some things change, but I really don't expect
Those
this.
are more generic comments. I'm talking like more specifically, like you'll see some of the lower end fighters who might speak up about fighter pay or might speak up about how the UFC runs things. Those are the guys you kind of see fall to the wayside.
Yeah, yeah. I was about to say that as well. But I don't see this like being the case where he is able to come back, because as Dana sees it, which makes sense, this is more of a like rat move, which, like I said, it makes sense. He went behind their back. He tried to see what the PFL had to offer, which I have to be honest, I understand as well from Mokaev's standpoint, because he is one of the best in his division at 23 already. He beat Manal Cup, and he was probably getting the title shot. And if you get a title shot, you probably would like to renegotiate, because once you're champion, it's different. So I do understand his side. He would have gotten a lot of fame if he would have become champion. So he would probably like to get some more money. But it's dumb to renegotiate before your last fight in the contract. Like, because if you put on a good performance, like, you have more leverage. But if you put on a shitter like he did, then I don't know. And now huge problems happen. Like, listen, if you're like a free agent because you're not re-signed yet, yeah, you can just walk around, like, talk to other promotions. But now you're coming off as a rat. You're coming off as somebody that's trying to leave before your contract is done, and that's not respected. So he came in a bad light. I feel like it's more of his manager that's been doing this, not him, which still doesn't matter because everybody's going to be pointing at Mokaev. So it is a hard position. I do understand them, but it's just bad timing in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's like a few things to look at this. I mean, again, like to do it before and have the shitty fight, I mean, is one thing, but there's a couple things to take away. You mentioned a point that I was thinking myself, which was the manager aspect of it all. I think that's a big ball drop because when you think about it like this, now most fighters, regardless of their age, tend to believe that the UFC is the premier promotion to be with, and I think that comes a lot from despite all these talks about fighter pay and all that stuff, I think it's a well-known fact amongst their peers is that the more you put in, the more you get out. And it's not just as an employee-employer, like the things that come with the UFC promote. Look, the best example is Alex Pereira. As he has completed fights, this guy's going on world tours and just making content with other massive content promotions, other networks in other parts of the world. Like he is taking that and running with it because he knows with this organization that is truly global, uh, there's a lot to be had outside of just the pay. So at 23 years old, to worry about the dotted line to me, it almost shows that he might not have that kind of faith in himself. Like a guy like Connor, like the guys who truly were a step above the rest for a period of time tend to come from the idea of believing in themselves and knowing that with their best work, they're going to get something out of it. And that's one thing about Dana you almost have to give credit on, right? Good fights, guys who don't pull out, guys who make, like he gives a lot of credit and he gives a lot of bump to the fighters who do their job. I mean, look at Marab. He might be one of the funniest fighters on the roster, but when it comes to style of fighting, I mean, people are just gonna like him because he's him. It reminds me of the Bilal fight. You guys are booing when Bilal has his back with that little half triangle position. But you know what the most ironic part about that was? The previous round, Leon had it, and no one was saying a single thing. So is it the style or is it the fighter? Well, it's starting to look a little bit more personal now, wouldn't you say? And I
Yeah,
think in this case, to not believe, sorry, I know I was giving you the open there, but just to finish it off, it's like from a management perspective, from a business perspective, from a believing in yourself in a solo sport perspective, he dropped the ball in every area.
yeah. I feel like for the fans, it's more of a personal thing because you've had so many fighters that have the same type of style, and people didn't hate him as much as they hated Mokaev. I don't know what it is about him, but people, man, I posted about it saying like, oh, he's cut, and that I don't think that it's deserved and that there is something else behind it. I don't think that it is because of his fighting style. People are like, yeah, but he's boring, he's this, he's that. But man, we've had so many boring fighters and people love them. People still love them because of the personality. They just see a Dagestani guy who had some fights against their favorite fighters, who beat their favorite fighters. So of course they're gonna hate. But I feel like these days there's some kind of Muslim hate as well because they are so dominant, which I don't understand. Because I put a poll on my story. I ask people, what do you expect in the UFC? Do you expect the best versus the best, or do you expect entertainment? 60% went for the best versus the best, but 40% still went for entertainment. So that 40%, they're probably going to be booing those Muslim fighters who just beat their favorite fighters by just grappling. So I don't know. For me that's a huge problem with this community because in the UFC you have to see the best versus the best.
Yeah,
So
so let me touch on that. What you mentioned one point. Sorry, I just want to just because you mentioned something that I really liked. So first of all, with that whole like the hate side of things, that 40%, I think that's the 40% that a lot of older guys like me are starting to not understand. But the fact is, they have a lot of pull because that is the future viewership of the UFC. And I think there's a lot of things you can say about the style of fan that's coming into the UFC, the fact that the WWE is so connected to the UFC now. Like you're seeing a lot more of these staged like brawls backstage and a lot more of these like moments where we didn't really have it before, but the quality of the fight was enough. You know, that persona was what we bought into. We didn't really need all this extra flair because we knew what we were getting with the card. And I think that part is really sad for grapplers because I did put up a post talking about the same thing because I don't think this community lasts in the GSP era. Like you talk to anyone my age who watched fights back then who might not even watch them anymore, like he's so goaded. And as a Canadian, I'll tell you, I respect the game because I believe in the opponent having to figure out ways to get out of it. But let's be real. He was the king of what everybody hates right now. And so it's just funny to see that parallel in such a change in the sport where it's affecting the rules, it's affecting the judges, the referees, the way fighters have to approach fights. There's so many things happening now to the sport where It's all driven by this new way of looking at the sport and the new types of followers that they're getting from the entertainment side. And that's the part that's kind of sad for me.
Yeah, and I do understand, man. People want entertainment. Of course, I want entertainment too. I'm not saying that I will be like super entertained watching Mokaev shoot for 30 takedowns a fight. I'm not. I'm gonna be honest, but I would still rather see him at the top than some guy that's entertaining but just doesn't deserve it skill wise. You have to see the best versus the best, and that's what the UFC is all about. And a lot of people are saying stuff like, yeah, but he caused a lot of problems, like with fighting a cop, this and that. Bro, I can name you 5 guys right now that had much more trouble than Mokaev. I'll name them right now. Kevin Holland, Hamza Chimaev, Masvidal, Conor, Jones, and like more and more and more. And of course, those guys make the money, so they won't get cut. But don't come here and tell me like, oh yeah, he deserved it because he does this and that. So all those other guys deserved it as well. Jones deserved it 100 times, 200 times, 500 times. And you're going to be telling me like, oh yeah, but he broke the rules and this and that. He fought Leon Edwards. His fight first, the first fight versus Bilal, literally got stopped because of his eye poke. He eye poked Usman a few times. He got literally a point taken away in their third fight because of nut shots. So that's bullshit as well. They just pick and choose. They're just cherry picking who they will hate, and I really dislike it. And this is just another reason to dislike Mokaev. I understand, but I feel like he as a person, even after his win against Cobb, he asked, "Is this enough for a new contract?" So they let him know before that, right? They did. And I feel like this guy still wanted to fight in the UFC, but the people around him, his manager, those type of people are more money hungry than he is, and they just try to get a better deal, and it backfired for Mokaev. The manager doesn't care. He'll probably get some good money at PFL, probably get more than in the UFC, but for Mokaev, man, his whole career might just never be the same because of this one move.
It won't be the same. That's a guaranteed fact. And to touch on a couple of things you did mention, um, from a fan perspective, yeah, there's going to be a lot of difference of opinions, the way we view the sport, what people are interested in right now. But let's take a look at it quickly from the UFC side. You were 100% right in saying we've seen plenty of fighters like Mokaev kind of work their way up. You see it with Bilal right now. Like, yeah, it was a tougher road than the average fighter, but you're going to pay your dues depending on your style in 2024. I mean, come correct. If you're a UFC fighter and you believe in your style, that just keep believing in it, because you might have to fight 2 or 3 more times than, say, a Sean O'Malley or even Colby Covington. For some of the fights this man gets, it's like, has he deserved those? I don't believe so. So it's in that sense, I give Mokaev a lot of credit, because let's look at it from that perspective. Muslim fighter from the UK with a Dagestani background. I mean, if that doesn't scream pull as a 23-year-old prospect in a
Undefeated
division
as
that
well.
requires, yeah, that requires a division that requires those types of fighters too. I mean, we can complain all we want about the way they've picked his fights with the Charles Johnson and all that, but look at Charles Johnson since that fight. I mean, the fact is, you're gonna have to, go through the fire to get there, and these are the fighters that are considered the top level of flyweight. So are they handpicking his fights? Maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, he was well on his way to start fighting real competition, where style wise, I did say, I did put up a post where, regardless of how that fight went, even if it was really well, like really good, I mean, how close are they really to that championship? You have a fight with Urseg and Kaikara France coming up, where without even watching the fight, I can tell you that both of those guys are more deserving in that title picture realm than the 2 guys I just watched fight. And it has nothing to do with the performance or anything outside of the cage. But the fact is that on a broken toe, Cop tried to do what he could do. Mokaev did what he had to do. And unfortunately, the fight looked the way it did. Mokaev tends to be a little bit more reserved because he believes in the counters, the timing. Get timing is in and out. It's a style like Izzy that everybody hated, right? But I love watching Izzy fight. He's probably one of my favorite fighters in the roster to watch, because I love the technique. So for me, I don't need a million punches and a bloody face for me to consider it's a good fight. But what we did see, coupled with what's happening, it's safe to say we'll never see Mokaev in the UFC again. I can pretty much guarantee that.
I'm not sure, because if he like really becomes a big name, huge name that beats everybody. Let's say, for example, if he goes to one and then within 1 year he beats Demetrius Johnson. I mean, I would love to see him in the UFC then. And I feel like,
Bro, I have to disagree with you there because the UFC is like they're a bunch of mean girls sometimes, right? When you think about the fact that because of a dying flyweight division, they traded away Demetrius Johnson for Ben Askren. Think about what they really thought that the pull that he had out there and the success he had was going to translate well and give them another star to kind of work with. But it was the complete opposite. And the fact of the matter is, we've seen so many fighters like that. I truly believe that undefeated prospects and all that stuff, the UFC believes that there's a dime a dozen. They will do their best to push their stars. And you can even say, man, within a month or two of Mokaev not being a UFC fighter and maybe even being with other promotions, it's a forgotten thought. And the UFC has in the past done this with several fighters.
I disagree. Because
look at Ngannou. Ngannou's another great example.
Ngannou is a huge name right now, bro.
But they want nothing to do with it. They wanted nothing to do with him then. They want nothing to do with him now.
Yeah.
He could become the greatest fighter of all time, and the UFC will not come within 10 feet of signing him. And Mokaev is not on that level. So for me, I truly believe that regardless of how we see that go, if Ngannou is never touching an octagon again, I can truly say if the UFC is going after every great flyweight, they're going to always have the argument that he's not even fighting the best fighters. Like, there's so many ways for the UFC to play it that they've done in the past that could easily work in their favor.
So I get what you're saying, but Ngannou is very fresh and they've had a crazy back and forth. Mokaev just got cut and he hasn't said anything, right? I feel like he will stay humble. He won't talk too much because he still wants to be in the UFC. He still wants it. Look at Jair Rodriguez. He got cut in 2018. I know you know this. He got cut because he didn't want to fight and this and that. And then they said that was a miscommunication. But we know damn well the UFC was like, shit, we shouldn't have cut him. So we'll get him back.
Talking about a Mexican fighter with one of the most exciting styles, pound for pound. That is not even comparable because they will chase fighters like that more than the undefeated prospect.
But it's about the name. It's about money making. Jair, although his style is very entertaining, he's not making the UFC any money. Let's be honest. He doesn't have a name. Mokaev.
I think he gives them pull with Mexican fans, and I think that for the UFC, that's a big deal. Their Mexican fighters get so much bump because of the fact that they're getting their own pay-per-view.
They could sign one of the biggest Mexican fighters, though. They can sign so many Mexican fighters. Look at it right now. Huge names. They could have signed so many, but they decided to sign him back because
name the ones that are better than Rodriguez with what he already had in the UFC. Like, the thing with the UFC is he's already made a name with them, and on top of that, in terms of quality, like he really is one of the better fighters. Period, and that comes with the Mexican pull and the style. Yes, he can't beat maybe the top 5 and maybe on a bad day the top 10. But we're still talking about a fighter who, from a business perspective, did the absolute worst. And like Ngannou wasn't even that bad. Ngannou was trying to get more than the UFC was willing to offer because they're so strict with their UFC pay. And that's why he left. So there was even a respective dialogue there, but we could still say how that ended and the bitterness, the what's the word? The pettiness of the UFC runs so deep that for me to believe that Mokaev is going to come back, I think they're going to work harder at finding someone to make us forget that there was ever a undefeated Dagestani English prospect than consider signing him. We're talking maybe 5 years down the line, there could be a chance if he's beating, if he's 40-0, and there's no left, they might decide to cut the entire flyweight division before signing this guy again. That's how petty the UFC can be.
Nah, I don't believe that. I feel like at some point, listen, if he beats a guy like DJ, if he beats a guy like Horiguchi, if he gets a title at Rise and a title at ONE FC, and it's like 4 or 5 years later, and he's like, everybody's talking about him being the best, I am sure that in 5 years they'll at least have a talk with each other, and Mokaev will probably be like, "Yeah, I'll need a few mil," and then they'll say nay, and then Dana will say, "Yeah, the kid just didn't want to fight." But I'm sure that they will have a conversation. That's what I'm thinking.
The
Listen,
only
I get what
reason
you're
that would
saying. I
happen,
get what you're saying, because
the
Dana is
only
very
reason that would
petty.
happen is if they run out of fighters and he is killing it somewhere else. Because how long has Ryzen been around? How long has the ONE FC been around? They've sent a lot of trash fighters over there to become champions, but not a lot of fighters have come over from there and found success here. And Ben Askren was probably the biggest name and the biggest move that gave the ONE FC kind of a connection to the UFC. But at the end of the day, you're not seeing many guys from there come over here from either
There's
promotion.
how
I think they
many
just started getting more Ryzen fighters recently. That's 2024.
how many UFC fighters went to ONE FC and became champion? DJ doesn't count because he was already champion.
Arjan Singh! Arjan Singh! He was an Indian heavyweight. He couldn't cut it. He was Indian DC. He could not cut it at this level. And he went over there, maybe changed up his diet, maybe changed up his dosage, and came away with a little something, something.
And then
but
what
like,
happened?
At the end of the day, he probably got caught. For me, I mean, jokes aside, yeah. But that's my point: is the quality, the level that the UFC sees themselves at, and the pettiness they operate with. They seem to not care at all. And even with, their entire fan base disagreeing with how the Nagano situation went, how many people did they really lose because of that? That product is so embedded in the MMA world that the decisions that they've made that should even have people reconsidering their allegiance, it doesn't. The fighter pay has been around forever. People love to go on comment sections and say all this shit. But if you actually research how a company has to operate, at the end of the day, there's a reason why fighters, knowing all of this, are still going to the UFC. And it's considered a privilege. And that privilege, Muhammad Mokaev took an absolute shit on. Like he shat on it in a paper bag, lit it on fire, and put it in front of Dana White's door.
Maybe it's just me hoping that we will see Mokaev back, because to me it didn't seem like Mokaev wanted to leave the UFC at all, that he tried to like renegotiate that kind of stuff. He just doesn't seem like the type. He was that kid that said I want to become a UFC champion before John Jones, so the UFC was really high, like on his pedestal. He loved being
and then they saw him fight.
Bro, it's bullshit, man. So many boring. Bilal is a champion right now, bro.
But see, I don't think Bilal's boring. I don't even think Mokaev's that boring.
Me neither. I
how
don't think
dare you? How dare we? Like, you can't make that. Like, even with his current run undefeated at 23, based on how the fights have gone, it's so difficult to compare that to a prime John Jones. Even if he wins the title close to, maybe even a few days before, you're still going to say, well, the style, the people he fought, it's nowhere near. John Jones was killing people during that run. So I think that comparison, that chasing John Jones as a 22, 23-year-old, whoever you are, that's what you're up against. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very difficult title to get in the first place at that age, and I think that's something that no one's going to really be able to do, man. It's going to take something very magical, because what Conor did to Aldo, to me, was probably the peak of something like that, because Aldo is such a high-level fighter.
We're talking about whole other things now. I think that we have said what we had to say. It's very unfortunate that Mokaev has been cut. I really hope that he still does well, because I think that he's still a very talented young man, and I feel like potentially he's the best in the division. With 3-4 years, he could be the best. So I'm hoping that the UFC changes their mind. I don't see it happening, but I'm still hoping.
The only way, in my opinion, is get rid of your entire team. Maybe move to the US, trade at Extreme Couture, get those connections that might be able to help you renegotiate this. Get a management team and a legal team to drop some paperwork that legally shows the UFC that he made a bad decision business wise, because this is at a level where they're looking at it from a business perspective, right? You just said, people can make all the comments they want about the style of fighting and all that. No, 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 no. This is actually what the UFC cares the most about when it comes to their fighters. Like allegiance, loyalty, uh, professionalism. And I think that ball being dropped, you said it earlier, the management. Like that, I think the only thing, the goodwill move, is to show the UFC that you've realized that you're a young kid. You were led down a path where you thought this was important to you. After it happened to you, you realized that it was an absolutely terrible mistake. And the only rectifying thing you can do is fire your management team for putting you through this. Hire someone with some experience, who can deal with the UFC and have that pull, and maybe go from there.
Exactly. So change managers, and I'm sure that Dana will at least listen.
Yeah, there's a lot of goodwill, professional things he might be able to do to change the narrative here, but I think that's the
Exactly.
only possibility.
Yeah, and I see him doing it as well. So that's why I'm saying I feel like there is a chance.
I hope for his sake, I hope he gets back.
All right, so that was everything, guys. Thank you for watching. If you want to give your opinion on this, let us know. And if we missed anything, let us know as well. Thank you, and we'll see you later.